So joining me now is David Schulhoff, the founder and CEO of the Music ETF. So when we look at music and streaming, first of all, thank you so much for being here today with us. This is one of my favorite conversations, especially as we approach, of course, Spotify earnings. But we've seen also some pretty nice outperformance right now in the global music industry ETF, up about 6% this year. So walk us through that outperformance and some of the trends you're seeing within this space.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Well, music is an uncorrelated investment class. Simple as that. Music's also very undervalued. And companies like Spotify they command tons of pricing power. So companies like Spotify are now raising rates again every quarter. They just announced they were going to raise rates in the EU and in Latin America. And look, music's just very undervalued. And in a decelerating economy, you want to have, recurring revenue businesses like music. So if you look at our top positions, Universal Music Group, Spotify, Live Nation, Tencent Music, all these companies are performing exceptionally well. Spotify's up 40% for the year already. It's up 120% for the last 12 months. Live Nation's up, 50% for the last 12 months. They just doubled their output of shows. You have the Cowboy Carter Show and Kendrick Lamar and SZA and Billie Eilish and Lady Gaga. They're all going on tour in 2025. So you want to own stocks in the music industry. You want things that are sort of tariffed, proof, that are not impacted by, pricing wars. You want to have pricing power companies. And, we have 28 companies in our fund, Jenny. As you said, MUSQ is up 6-7% for the year. It's outperforming the Qs that are down 9%. It's outperforming the SPYs that are down 8%. And so I'm really out there just evangelizing about the music industry and letting people know, hey, you can invest across content, streaming, live music events and ticketing, equipment and technology. And we have all these companies in our fund. 40% of the holdings are international and 60% are domestic.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on the domestic here, as I do know about 10% of the position is made up of Apple or Amazon, which I believe both have about 5%. So has that been any bit of a drag? Because obviously in past years, it's been, I'm sure, a huge actually component of upside. But with some of these massive tech names that do have exposure into specifically more of the audio music world, but also have other various headwinds right now looming, I mean, has that been a bit of an unusual drag you haven't seen historically?
So look, Apple, Amazon, and Google, we have to include them in the fund because after Spotify and Tencent, they're the third, fourth, and fifth largest streaming companies in the world. They're only 5% weights in the fund. Our top positions, like I said, Spotify's almost 10%, Live Nation's almost 10%. But these companies are growing in the music sector too. Apple has now 110 million paid subscribers. It's 10% of their services business. It's about $10 billion. Amazon has about 100 million paid streaming subscribers. If you read the Goldman Sachs report, Jenny, the industry is doubling between today and 2030. Streaming subscribers are growing worldwide. Recorded music is growing at 15 to 25%, as high as 50% in the emerging markets. So, again, in a decelerating economy, you want to own stocks that are growing, that are outperforming, all these other industries that are really impacted by tariffs. But, no, look, those companies that you mentioned, Apple, Amazon, and Google, they do face headwinds. We'll see for how long. I mean, Apple's been granted a reprieve. They've been corrected harshly over the last, 3-4 months. I think they're going to recover well. But, most of the companies in our fund are pure play music companies. Again, if you look at MUSQ, 80% of the holdings in their fund are real pure play music companies, meaning they generate more than 50% of their revenues from music. And then 20% of the fund are companies like Apple, Amazon, and Google and Sony that generate more than 20% of their revenues from music. So we provide exposure to the entire global music ecosystem. And we want to give investors a very convenient and liquid way to invest across streaming and content and live music and equipment and technology.
Okay, so as we move forward in the music space, I am curious about trends you're looking forward to, first of all, but also, is there any major threat from generative AI? Because I do know from the various deep fakes out there and the copyright concerns that there are artists that are using AI to generate music, which is just something it's unprecedented. So is that any concern, or is that more hyped up from social media? And what else are you watching now as we move forward into the music space and the rest of this year?
Look, anytime, Jenny, there's a very disruptive technology. Today it's AR. 50 years ago it was VCRs that went to the US Supreme Court, and all the studios and labels said, was going to destroy their business. The music companies flipped out over Napster. You know, AI today is like going to be absolutely huge for the industry. You do face potential risks with market saturation and piracy, but the opportunity to create new music, to license music from existing catalogs and get those sampled in new songs, that's going to be a windfall. It all comes down to consent, control, and compensation, Jenny. The artists and the estates and the publishers and the labels have to consent on the use. They have to agree on the terms of the use. And once they've done that, it's going to be an enormous windfall. So everyone is screaming AI. Music is always like the guinea pig for the first technology that's threatening a content business, but the benefits of it far outweigh any of the risks that we're seeing today.
Okay, and I like that because I totally agree. I feel like this is, if anything, so cool from a creation standpoint, and sometimes not maybe as negative as the headlines would always have you believe. So we appreciate it. This is such a great way to kick off this week as we get Spotify earnings and then so many of these other companies that we even discussed. So we appreciate it. For all of the wonderful help here, David Schulhoff, the founder and CEO of course, the Music ETF. So a really great conversation there ahead of Spotify.